Hash the Rock, America's greatest prison break. On the morning of June 12, 1962, a prison guard making his routine bed check on Alcatraz Island stopped dead in his tracks. Staring back at him from 3 prison bunks were 3 heads, hair carefully combed, eyes closed in peaceful slumber. But these weren't sleeping inmates. They were masterful decoys crafted from plaster, toilet paper, and real human hair, designed to fool the guards while their creators vanished into the treacherous waters of San Francisco Bay. What the guard had discovered was not just 3 empty beds, but the culmination of one of the most audacious and meticulously planned prison escapes in American history. 3 men had done what experts said was impossible. They had escaped from Alcatraz, the maximum security prison known simply as the Rock, a fortress so impregnable that it had held the nation's most dangerous criminals for nearly 3 decades without a single successful breakout. But did they really escape? Or did the cold, unforgiving waters of San Francisco Bay become their tomb? This is the story of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, and the mystery that has captivated America for over 60 years, a tale that asks the ultimate question. Can the human spirit, armed with ingenuity and desperation, overcome any barrier that man can devise? Alcatraz Island rises from San Francisco Bay like a stone monument to human futility, its sheer cliffs and fortress-like buildings silhouetted against the California sky. The island, barely a mile and a half from the bustling streets of San Francisco, might as well have been on another planet for the men imprisoned there. The waters surrounding it are frigid year-round, with temperatures rarely rising above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Powerful currents and riptides turn the bay into a liquid labyrinth that has claimed countless lives over the centuries. When Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary opened its doors in 1934, it was designed to be America's ultimate prison, a place where the country's most incorrigible criminals would spend their remaining days. The conversion of the former military prison into a federal penitentiary had been overseen by the Bureau of Prisons with one goal in mind: create a facility from which escape would be impossible. The prison's reputation was built on its extreme security measures and its roster of infamous inmates. Al Capone, the notorious Chicago gangster, spent 4.5 years on the island. George "Machine Gun" Kelly, the kidnapper whose crimes terrorized the nation, lived out his days behind Alcatraz's thick walls. Robert Stroud, known as the Birdman of Alcatraz, served 42 years in solitary confinement there. These men, and hundreds like them, had been sent to Alcatraz with the clear message that society was finished with them. The prison itself was a marvel of security engineering for its time. Every window was fitted with steel bars and bulletproof glass. Guard towers provided 360-degree surveillance of the island, with sharpshooters maintaining constant vigilance. The cell blocks were constructed with reinforced concrete and steel, designed to withstand any attempt at destruction or modification. Each cell measured just 5 feet by 9 feet by 7 feet high, barely large enough for a single bed, a sink, a toilet, and a small shelf. But it was not just the physical barriers that made Alcatraz formidable. The prison operated under a regime of silence, strict discipline, and constant surveillance. Inmates were counted 11 times per day. Every movement was monitored, every interaction scrutinized. The prison's isolation was psychological as well as physical. Inmates could see the lights of San Francisco twinkling across the water, a constant reminder of the freedom they had lost and would never regain. Yet for all its reputation as an inescapable fortress, Alcatraz had seen its share of escape attempts. From 1934 to 1963, 36 men participated in 14 separate escape attempts. Some were shot down by guards before they could reach the water. Others made it to the bay only to drown in its treacherous currents or die of hypothermia. A few were recaptured on the island itself, their plans undone by informants or simple bad luck. Not one of these 36 men had ever been confirmed to have reached the mainland alive. Into this fortress of despair came 3 men who would prove that the human capacity for hope and ingenuity could not be extinguished by any amount of steel and concrete. Frank Lee Morris was perhaps the most remarkable of the 3, a career criminal whose life read like a catalog of American correctional facilities. Born in 1926 to a family that couldn't care for him, Morris had spent his childhood bouncing between foster homes and reform schools, never finding the stability that might have set him on a different path. By the time Morris reached Alcatraz in January 1960, he had already escaped from prison multiple times, earning him a reputation as one of the most elusive inmates in the federal system. He was serving a 14-year sentence for bank robbery, but it was his history of escapes that had brought him to the attention of Alcatraz authorities. If any prison could hold Frank Morris, they believed it was the Rock. Morris was not a large man physically, standing about 5 feet 7 inches tall with a slight build. But what he lacked in physical presence, he more than made up for in intelligence and determination. Prison psychologists who evaluated him described him as having an IQ of 133, well above average, and noted his exceptional ability to plan and execute complex schemes. He was quiet, observant, and possessed of the kind of patience that could turn months of careful observation into opportunities that others would never see. The Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, arrived at Alcatraz within a year of Morris, and they brought with them both the desperation of men facing long sentences and the kind of familial bond that could sustain them through the darkest times. John Anglin had arrived first, in 1960, followed by his brother Clarence in 1961. Both men were serving sentences for bank robbery, part of a family tradition of crime that had already claimed several of their siblings to the prison system. Unlike Morris, who was a loner by nature and necessity, the Anglin brothers had the advantage of unbreakable loyalty and trust. They had grown up together, committed crimes together, and now faced imprisonment together. This bond would prove crucial to the success of their escape plan, as it provided them with partners they could trust absolutely in a world where trust could mean the difference between freedom and a lifetime behind bars. The fourth member of their group was Alan West, an inmate who would play a crucial role in the planning stages of the escape, but whose failure to complete his preparations would ultimately leave him behind on the night of the breakout. West was serving time for car theft and had been assigned to a cell adjacent to the others, a coincidence of prison administration that would prove fateful. As 1961 turned into 1962, these four men began to notice something that previous inmates had either missed or been unable to exploit. The walls of their cells, despite being made of reinforced concrete, were beginning to show signs of age and deterioration. The salt air of San Francisco Bay, combined with decades of temperature fluctuations and the natural settling of the building, had created tiny cracks and weak spots in the cell walls that a determined inmate might be able to exploit. The discovery of a cache of saw blades in December 1961 provided the catalyst that transformed observation into action. How these blades came to be in their possession remains a mystery to this day, but their discovery marked the beginning of one of the most elaborate prison break schemes ever attempted. What followed was a masterclass in patience, ingenuity, and meticulous planning that would unfold over 6 months of careful preparation. Working primarily during the prison's music hour, when the sounds of instruments and singing would mask the noise of their activities, the four men began the painstaking process of enlarging the ventilation grills at the backs of their cells. Using homemade tools fashioned from saw blades, spoons, and even a motor from a vacuum cleaner that had been converted into a drill, they slowly carved away at the concrete around the vent openings. The work was extraordinarily difficult and dangerous. A single discovery by guards would mean solitary confinement, additional years added to their sentences, and the end of any hope of freedom. Every chip of concrete had to be collected and disposed of carefully. Every tool had to be hidden after use. Every moment of work had to be timed to coincide with periods when guards were least likely to discover their activities. To conceal their work, the inmates created false facades that could be quickly placed over the enlarged holes whenever guards approached. These were crafted from cardboard and painted to match the original appearance of the vents, a deception so effective that it fooled guards for months. The men took turns standing watch while others worked, developing a system of signals and communication that allowed them to coordinate their efforts without attracting attention. Behind their cells lay a utility corridor that ran the length of the cell block, a space that had been designed to provide access to the prison's plumbing and electrical systems, but which also offered the inmates something far more valuable: a hidden workspace where they could prepare for their escape without being observed. Once they had enlarged the holes enough to squeeze through, they began using this corridor not just as a route to the outside world, but as a secret workshop where they could construct the tools and equipment they would need for their journey across San Francisco Bay. The most ambitious part of their preparation involved the construction of a life raft and life preservers that could carry them across the treacherous waters to the mainland. Using more than 50 raincoats stolen from prison supplies, they began the painstaking process of creating a 6-foot by 14-foot inflatable raft. This was not simply a matter of sewing raincoats together. The men had to create watertight seals that could withstand the pressure of inflation and the stress of use in rough water. To accomplish this, they used steam from the prison's pipes to vulcanize the seams, a process that required them to understand the basic principles of rubber manufacturing and apply them under the most primitive conditions. They also constructed several life preservers using the same techniques, ensuring that each member of the escape party would have individual flotation in case the raft failed or became separated. Not content with simply staying afloat, the inmates also crafted wooden paddles that would allow them to navigate the bay's currents and reach their intended landing point. They even constructed a makeshift air pump from a musical instrument, demonstrating the kind of innovative thinking that would be necessary for their plan to succeed. As their preparations neared completion, the inmates faced the challenge of finding a route from their hidden workshop to the outside world. Through careful exploration of the prison's infrastructure, they discovered that they could access the roof of the cell block by climbing through a ventilation shaft. This shaft was secured with a metal grate, but the inmates found that they could remove the bolts holding it in place and create a fake bolt from soap that would hold the grate closed while allowing them to open it when the time came. The level of planning and preparation that went into this escape was unprecedented in the history of American corrections. Every detail had been thought through, every contingency planned for, every piece of equipment tested and retested. The inmates had essentially created an entire engineering project within the confines of the most secure prison in America, using materials stolen from the prison itself and tools fashioned from discarded items. But for all their preparation, the success of their plan would ultimately depend on factors beyond their control: the weather, the tides, their own physical stamina, and most importantly, their ability to execute their plan flawlessly on the night of the escape. Any mistake, any delay, any unexpected complication could mean the difference between freedom and death. The night of June 11th, 1962, began like any other evening at Alcatraz. Guards made their routine counts, inmates settled into their cells, and the prison assumed the quiet rhythm that marked the end of another day. But in cells adjacent to each other in B Block, 3 men were preparing for the most important night of their lives. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had spent months preparing for this moment, and as darkness fell over San Francisco Bay, they began the final phase of their escape. The dummy heads they had created were carefully positioned in their beds, complete with real hair obtained from the prison barber shop and painted features that would fool guards making their nighttime rounds. These decoys were masterpieces of prison craftsmanship, so realistic that they would continue to deceive guards for hours after the inmates had vanished. Alan West, who had been instrumental in the planning of the escape, faced a devastating setback that would cost him his freedom. Despite months of careful preparation, he had been unable to complete the enlargement of his cell's ventilation grate. As Morris and the Anglin brothers prepared to slip through their enlarged openings, West found himself trapped in his cell, unable to follow them to freedom. The decision facing the 3 men was agonizing: wait for West and risk discovery, or proceed without him and abandon their fellow conspirator. They chose to proceed. At approximately 10:30 in the evening, Frank Morris squeezed through the opening at the back of his cell, followed by John and Clarence Anglin. Behind them, they left Alan West frantically working to enlarge his opening, knowing that every minute that passed increased the risk that their escape would be discovered. Moving through the utility corridor with equipment they had spent months preparing, the three men made their way to the ventilation shaft that would take them to the roof. The shaft was narrow and vertical, requiring them to climb hand over hand while carrying the raft and other equipment necessary for their journey. The physical demands of this part of the escape were enormous, but months of preparation had conditioned them for exactly this kind of exertion. Once on the roof, the escapees faced the challenge of descending to ground level without being spotted by guards in the watchtowers. Using a route they had scouted during their preparation, they made their way to a smokestack that provided them with cover as they lowered themselves to the prison yard. From there, they had to cross open ground to reach the island's shoreline, a journey that required them to move silently and carefully to avoid detection. The northeast shore of Alcatraz Island provided the launching point for their homemade raft, a location chosen because it offered the best combination of concealment from guard towers and favorable currents for their journey to the mainland. As they inflated their raft and prepared to enter the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay, the three men were embarking on what many experts considered a suicide mission. The waters surrounding Alcatraz are notorious for their deadly combination of cold temperature, powerful currents, and unpredictable weather. Even experienced swimmers wearing modern equipment have struggled to make the crossing, and many have died in the attempt. For three prison inmates using homemade equipment and facing exhaustion from their escape, the odds of survival were considered minimal by most experts. Yet Morris and the Anglin brothers pushed their raft into the dark waters and began paddling toward the Marin County shore. What happened next remains one of the greatest mysteries in American criminal history. Did they successfully reach the mainland and begin new lives under assumed identities? Or did they join the countless others who had perished in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay? The morning of June 12th dawned clear and calm over Alcatraz Island, but the tranquility was shattered when guards discovered that three of the prison's most carefully watched inmates had vanished. The dummy heads that had fooled guards during their nighttime checks were now revealed as the elaborate deceptions they were, and the discovery of the enlarged ventilation grates told the story of months of careful preparation and planning. Within hours, Alcatraz was in complete lockdown as guards searched every inch of the island for signs of the missing inmates. The warden, Allen Blackwell, faced the nightmare scenario that every prison administrator dreaded. Inmates had not only escaped from his facility, but had apparently done so using methods that called into question the basic security of the entire institution. The response was immediate and massive. The FBI launched what would become one of the longest-running investigations in its history, deploying agents throughout California and beyond to search for the escapees. The Coast Guard initiated extensive search and rescue operations in San Francisco Bay, using helicopters, boats, and divers to comb the waters for any sign of the three men or their improvised raft. Within 48 hours of the escape, searchers began finding debris that suggested the inmates' journey had ended in tragedy. Pieces of paddle-like wood were discovered floating in the bay, along with portions of rubber inner tubes and a homemade life vest. Most significantly, investigators found a sealed packet of letters and photographs belonging to Clarence Anglin, items that the escapee would have been unlikely to abandon if he had survived the crossing. The discovery of this debris led many investigators to conclude that the escape had failed, that Morris and the Anglin brothers had drowned in the bay's treacherous waters just as so many others had before them. But the absence of bodies raised questions that would persist for decades. If the men had drowned, where were their remains? Why had no definitive trace of them ever been found? Alan West, who had been left behind when his cell modifications proved inadequate, became a crucial witness in the investigation that followed. Facing additional charges for his role in the escape attempt, West provided investigators with detailed accounts of the planning and preparation that had gone into the breakout. His testimony revealed the extraordinary level of ingenuity and determination that had made the escape possible, but it also highlighted the enormous risks the three men had taken in their bid for freedom. West's account of the escape plan included details that investigators were able to verify through physical evidence found in the prison and in the bay. His description of the raft construction matched debris that had been recovered, and his explanation of the route taken by the escapees was consistent with the evidence found at various points along their path. Yet West could provide no information about what had happened to his fellow conspirators once they entered the water, leaving the ultimate fate of Morris and the Anglin brothers as mysterious as ever. The FBI investigation expanded far beyond San Francisco Bay as agents explored every possible lead and theory about the escapees' fate. If the men had survived their water crossing, they would need money, transportation, and places to hide. Investigators examined the financial records and communications of family members and known associates, looking for any sign that the escapees were receiving assistance. The investigation revealed that members of the Anglin family had a history of providing mutual support during times of legal trouble, and some relatives had criminal records of their own. This raised the possibility that the brothers might have arranged for assistance in advance of their escape, but despite extensive surveillance and investigation, no evidence of post-escape contact was ever discovered. Similarly, investigators looked into Frank Morris's background and associations, searching for anyone who might have provided him with assistance after his escape. Morris's history as a loner worked against him in this regard, as he had fewer potential allies than the Anglin brothers, but it also made him harder to track if he had indeed survived the crossing. The absence of any confirmed criminal activity that could be attributed to the escapees became one of the strongest arguments for the theory that they had drowned during their escape attempt. Morris and the Anglin brothers were career criminals who had supported themselves through bank robberies and other illegal activities. If they had survived and established new lives, investigators reasoned, they would likely have continued their criminal careers, creating opportunities for law enforcement to track them down. Yet no bank robberies, no stolen cars, no forged documents, and no other criminal activities were ever definitively linked to the three men. This could mean that they had drowned as investigators believed, or it could mean that they had successfully reinvented themselves and learned to live within the law, a transformation that would be remarkable given their criminal histories. As the investigation continued through the 1960s and into the 70s, it became clear that the Alcatraz escape had captured the public imagination in ways that went far beyond typical criminal cases. The story had all the elements of classic American mythology: the underdog challenging an impossible system, ingenuity triumphing over institutional power, and the eternal question of whether the human spirit could overcome any obstacle. Hollywood seized on the story, producing films and television shows that dramatized the escape and speculated about its outcome. Books were written exploring every aspect of the case, from the technical details of the inmates' preparations to psychological profiles of the men involved. The escape became a symbol of rebellion against authority, a demonstration that even the most secure institutions could be defeated by determination and intelligence. But the romanticization of the escape also raised uncomfortable questions about the nature of heroism and the tendency to celebrate criminals who demonstrated exceptional ingenuity. Morris and the Anglin brothers were not political prisoners or victims of injustice. They were career criminals who had been sent to Alcatraz because they had repeatedly violated the law and posed a continuing threat to society. Their escape, however impressive as a feat of planning and execution, had potentially returned dangerous individuals to the community. The public's fascination with the case also reflected broader anxieties about the effectiveness of the American justice system. If inmates could escape from Alcatraz, what did that say about the ability of any prison to protect society from its most dangerous members? The escape became a symbol of institutional failure as much as individual triumph, raising questions about whether the concept of truly secure incarceration was simply an illusion. As the 70s gave way to the 80s, and the original investigation stretched beyond its first decade, the FBI began to acknowledge that the case might never be solved definitively. Despite thousands of hours of investigation, hundreds of interviews, and extensive searches throughout the United States and beyond, no conclusive evidence of the escapees' fate had been discovered. On December 31st, 1979, exactly 17 years after the escape, the FBI officially closed its active investigation and transferred the case to the United States Marshals Service. This transfer reflected the Bureau's conclusion that the escapees were most likely dead, but it also acknowledged that if they had survived, they would now be fugitives from federal justice, a responsibility that fell within the Marshal's jurisdiction. The Marshal's Service has maintained the case as an open investigation, following up on tips and leads as they arise, but without the intensive resources that characterized the FBI's original investigation. Over the decades since the transfer, hundreds of potential sightings and tips have been reported, but none have provided conclusive evidence about the escapees' fate. Some of the most intriguing leads have come from alleged deathbed confessions by individuals claiming to have information about the escape or its aftermath. Others have involved claimed sightings of the escapees in various locations throughout the United States and beyond. A few have included alleged communications from the escapees themselves, but forensic analysis has failed to authenticate any of these claims. In recent years, advanced forensic techniques have been applied to evidence from the original case, including DNA analysis of hair samples and other materials. These efforts have provided some new insights into the escape and its preparation, but they have not resolved the fundamental question of whether Morris and the Anglin brothers survived their journey across San Francisco Bay. The case has also benefited from advances in understanding of San Francisco Bay's currents and weather patterns. Computer modeling and historical analysis have provided new insights into the conditions the escapees would have faced during their crossing, but these studies have reached conflicting conclusions about the likelihood of survival. Some suggest that the tides and currents on the night of June 11th would have made a successful crossing possible for experienced swimmers with adequate equipment, while others maintain that the odds of survival were minimal. The enduring mystery of the Alcatraz escape reflects broader questions about the nature of justice, the effectiveness of punishment, and the limits of institutional control. The fact that 3 inmates could plan and execute such an elaborate escape from America's most secure prison suggests that human ingenuity and determination can overcome even the most formidable obstacles. But the uncertainty about their ultimate fate also demonstrates the risks inherent in challenging such obstacles and the thin line between triumph and tragedy. As we approach the 60th anniversary of the escape, the case continues to generate new theories, new investigations, and new claims about the escapees' fate. Recent television documentaries have presented evidence suggesting that the Anglin brothers survived and lived for decades after their escape, while other experts maintain that the physical evidence strongly suggests they drowned in San Francisco Bay. The truth about what happened to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers may never be known with certainty. They may have perished in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay, joining the ranks of those who died attempting to escape from Alcatraz, or they may have successfully crossed to freedom, living out their lives under assumed identities while the world wondered about their fate. What we do know is that their escape represents one of the most remarkable examples of human ingenuity and determination in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Using nothing but their intelligence, their patience, and materials stolen from the prison itself, 3 men managed to overcome security measures that had been designed by experts to prevent exactly what they accomplished. The legacy of their escape extends far beyond the question of whether they survived. It forced fundamental changes in American prison security, led to the eventual closure of Alcatraz as a federal penitentiary, and demonstrated that no institution, however secure, is invulnerable to human creativity and determination. Perhaps most importantly, the Alcatraz escape serves as a reminder that the human spirit cannot be contained by walls, bars, or guard towers. Whether Morris and the Anglin brothers lived or died on June 11, 1962, they achieved something that most people would consider impossible. They proved that with enough intelligence, patience, and courage, even the most formidable barriers can be overcome. Their story challenges us to consider our own limitations and the barriers we accept as insurmountable in our own lives. It reminds us that creativity and determination can triumph over institutional power, and that the human capacity for hope and ingenuity cannot be extinguished by any amount of concrete and steel. The waters of San Francisco Bay continue to flow around Alcatraz Island, carrying their secrets toward the Pacific Ocean. The island itself now serves as a tourist attraction, its former role as America's most secure prison transformed into a symbol of human resilience and the eternal quest for freedom. Visitors walk through the same corridors where Morris and the Anglin brothers planned their escape, stand in the same cells where they spent months preparing their equipment, and wonder at the audacity of three men who refused to accept that their situation was hopeless. The question of whether they succeeded in their quest for freedom may never be answered definitively, but their attempt itself stands as a testament to the power of human determination and the enduring belief that no obstacle is truly insurmountable. In a world where we often accept limitations as permanent and barriers as absolute, the story of the Alcatraz escape reminds us that sometimes the impossible is simply something that no one has yet had the courage and ingenuity to attempt. Whether Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers died in San Francisco Bay or lived to enjoy the freedom they sought so desperately, their legacy is secure. They showed that even in the most controlled and oppressive environments, the human spirit can find ways to express itself, to hope for something better, and to take extraordinary risks in pursuit of that hope. Their story will continue to inspire and challenge us, reminding us that the only truly insurmountable barriers are the ones we accept in our own minds.